when I read how the country report suggests that it has virtually disappeared in Mauritania, and then we have testimony from Charles Jacobs today from the American Anti-Slavery Group that points out that as recently as 1993, the United States State Department estimated that up to 90,000 blacks still lived as property in Mauritania. And then we have testimony as well from Samuel Cotton from the Coalition Against Slavery in Mauritania and Sudan, who points out that the practice remains massive and rampant in Mauritania, and says that the testimony that he has gleaned in going there for fact-finding suggests that the charge that slavery is still a way of life in Mauritania has simply shifted from the overt to the covert practice. So while there are paper promises that abound and legal strictures on the books against the overt practice, it seems to have gone underground based on testimony and evidence that both of our subcommittees have received, and there's volumes of it. How does the State Department respond to that, especially in light of the idea that it has, quote, virtually disappeared?
Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman, I do thank you for underlining the point of the apparent discrepancy between the numbers cited last year and in this year's report. As I was reviewing this material, it occurred to me that there is very plausible cause for confusion, and if I may, I would like to read the 3 operative paragraphs from this year's Human Rights Report concerning Mauritania, because it does, I think, go a bit to the point of that you brought up, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman as well, chattel versus servitude. Mauritania has officially abolished slavery several times, most recently in 1980. Nevertheless, the legacy of slavery remains in its economic and psychological manifestations, and there are reports of persons continuing to live in conditions of involuntary servitude. Tens of thousands of persons whose ancestors were slaves still occupy positions of servitude and near servitude, although such practices as coercive slavery and commerce in slaves appear to have virtually disappeared. In most cases, those remaining in a situation of unpaid or poorly paid servitude do so for lack of better alternatives or lack of knowledge about their own status. Some freed slaves, Haratin, have either stayed with or returned to their former masters and continue to provide labor in exchange for room, board, and other basic necessities. Others live independently but continue in a symbiotic relationship with their former masters, performing occasional paid or unpaid labor in exchange for food, clothing, and medical care. There are no reliable statistics for the number of Haratins who continue to work for the same families for which they worked before the emancipation of 1980, whether as paid or unpaid labor. Reports of cases of involuntary servitude are rare and unconfirmed. I believe those are the 2. There's another paragraph that addresses the question of custody and inheritance, but those, I think, accurately describe the situation that our staff in Nouakchott, as well as our researchers back here, describe the situation as of 1995.
Let me just ask you, how do you respond to the assertion that it has just simply gone underground, and that 90,000 people, I mean, if they were indeed freed, I think there would have been some evidence of that, other than they're just, because of a symbiotic relationship or some other reason, just stayed with their, quote, masters. And what kind of reporting do we actually get? I mean, we've heard that the sale of slaves no longer occurs in the public square. It occurs behind closed doors, often in private residences and things of that kind. Mm. So, you know, that's certainly out of sight in terms of perhaps our investigators or our embassy people to ascertain the facts.
Well, in fact, we would welcome any indications or any evidence or any leads that we could pursue concerning the sale or the transfer of human beings. When we have asked some of those journalists and investigators for particulars that we might follow up on, unfortunately the particulars have not been forthcoming in a way that was timely or inclusive enough to enable our people on the ground, or indeed other international investigators, to specifically identify such an instance.